Hey everybody, welcome to a special guest quest, a special Friday edition where we have the smartest people on Friday nights, folks. That's what you got to remember. That's why the rest of the cast isn't here. My name's Turner. I am the host and only cast member appearing tonight for another episode of Guest Quest, brought the tabletop role playing community interview show brought to you by the Gimme the Loot podcast, the Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition actual play podcast that finally remembered how he intros this thing. Joining me tonight is Kris, the deserted GM or deserted GM, depending upon your particular flavor at the moment. He describes himself as a goth in the desert, longtime Middle Earther, eternal GM, and is absolutely a professional game master. And Kris, welcome. How are you this evening, sir?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, doing all right. Thank you.
Deserted or deserted? Which is that the proper?
No, I can be in the desert and dessert. I don't know.
There we go. There we go. Nothing wrong with it swinging both ways. So the got a couple of things that we want to jump in. One, wanted to have the opportunity to have you on because I actually met you for the first time during Jasper's game day in a match which shall not be named, and had a blast playing with you, and then kind of found out tangentially you were associated with or friends with or knew another friend of the show, and it was like, man, giant universe, small community, I guess, but it worked out that you guys came on and participated in our level 20 fight night, a a an experience that, while it was fun, I don't ever wish to repeat. Level 20.
Come on.
No, look, not you guys, the level 20 part of it. Like that is a particular experience that was very a Sisyphean rebooting of battles where the heals kept on coming, and the time like one of the few guest questions that we truly have pushed up to the time limit. But in that night, you'd kind of we knew you were doing some pro GMing, but then also talked about you being a Lord of the Ring game master and really kind of diving into the Lord of the Rings TTRPG. And as I have allowed my TTRPG backlog to grow, one of the systems that is on deck for me to somehow find some time to really do a deep dive into is the Lord of the Rings system. And when you were like, hey, this is my thing, I was like, you know what? This is a perfect opportunity for me to cheat and just have somebody come on and talk about it. So on that, Lord of the Rings, I guess I don't think we need a synopsis of the Lord of the Rings, but maybe give us kind of the bird's eye view of what the setting is for the second edition Lord of the Rings role playing game.
Second edition, the One Ring. It's partway. It's 2/3. Well, it's 1/3 through the time between The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. So,
Okay.
Which is nice. There's a lot of room for stuff that there's some stuff that will be familiar, but there's a lot of room to do stuff that's not totally predetermined.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing, I think, with the with games that are based on a narrative property that has a start and finish, and a start and finish that everybody is familiar with, unless you couldn't sit through the 12-hour special edition Return of the King that had the endings on it. With something that is based on that kind of property, do you ever feel like your hands are tied a little bit from a narrative standpoint? What is your is that, I mean, one, it's always nice to, I think, to have a reference point when you're coming up with adventures for that, but do you ever feel like you're kind of bound a little bit by that, or do you invite we'll get to it, Dreeken, hang on. Do you feel like you've got room to really kind of work in the space?
There's some. Well, in the end, it's your table. You do what you want. If you want to completely rewrite all the books and what happens, you can. I tend not to, and I try and stay away even from doing the Universal Studios tour, like, oh look, there's Aragorn, oh look, there's, although the One Ring kind of encourages a little bit with some of the characters, or at least it's an option. But no, I don't the nice thing about this, and I think a lot with a lot of sort of big and interesting IPs, is there's a lot of material, a lot maybe with Middle Earth a little less because it's really only 2 books and then a whole bunch of material from earlier. But there is so much space in that world that never gets described, that never gets explored.
Yeah, they're it is a fairly, despite the timeline of the Lord of the Rings saga, and then the Hobbit, being generational, it is a fairly linear narrative from kind of start to finish. Like there's not and look, I respect a fantasy author that manages to keep their narrative and is able to follow a line through. Martin, excuse me, sorry. I got some fire and ice caught in my throat there for a second. But I guess the question really I'm getting at is what is some of that other space that is there anything that the I guess the TTRPG book set up or kind of opens the gates to that you don't get through the original novels?
Yeah, no, I was talking to the players in a new campaign that's just starting. We just had our session 0, and we were talking about what are you hoping to see for your characters, and what kind of gameplay do you like? I was saying, when I first read The Hobbit and then The Lord of the Rings, you get this incredibly detailed, this one path that everybody's following, and then sort of out of the corners of these characters' eyes, you see a little bit of the world. And I always thought, oh man, just turn over there, just walk down there. Can I go explore over there? And so with the One Ring, the second edition, just built on the first edition, right, which looks back towards a lot of, I think, prior material that was developed for role-playing games in Middle Earth, even though they can't say. They're doing a really good job trying to fill in some of that world, using references in those 2 major books, in the more popular books, using material that Tolkien otherwise wrote for the appendices, the Silmarillion, the stuff that never made it into sort of collected tales, at least during his lifetime.
Right.
And some inventive work. It just doesn't get that fine grained in Tolkien's other writings.
Yeah, it's that's the thing is I put, and this is this is just me not being as familiar with the extended works of Tolkien, have the very kind of snapshot view of it being the world of the movies. You know what I mean? I'm not familiar with the similarity and haven't done any kind of the extra legwork to pick it up. Because to be honest with you, I bounced off the Hobbit the first time. And then came back. It took a couple attempts for me to get through it, mainly because of Tom Bombadil, but that's a whole other subject. So yeah, I know. I'm a horrible
I love him.
So the Dreeken asks, because I can't ignore it or he gets angry. Does the system involve second breakfast? Is there a role for 11sies at some point in the game?
I don't think there's a rule, but there's absolute. If you don't do second breakfast, 11sies, 2 dinners, and a supper, then what are you even doing?
What are you even playing the game for? That's
right.
So let's talk about the mechanics a little bit. Is it a D20 system? What kind of walk us through the basics of the system?
No, it's a dice pool system, which is a lot of fun because you can find lots of ways to roll lots and lots of dice. But the basis is always a D12 for anything that determines the number of things, and then a pool, smaller or larger, of D6s depending on how well the character can do something. It's super skill based. All right, so you can probably see this like back there. So what you can see of my shelf full of MERP stuff.
We're gonna zoom in there. So
there you go.
Now you're in the highlight. Yeah, okay.
All the OG gamers, we were like, that's what I started playing role-playing games in Middle Earth with, the good old Middle Earth role play put out by Iron Crown Enterprises, and while it had its faults and maybe some of it didn't fit really well, they did an amazing job at world building. Even when you chuck out the stuff that they were putting in to maybe make it a bit more high fantasy or high magic than it really should be, or but some, like Merp, the One Ring is very skill based. So everything's a skill. Everything's based on sort of developing your character's abilities in a variety of things, and it's not as combat oriented as the other game that shall not be named. D20.
Well, look, it has its roots in wargaming. We understand that. So
yeah. And it's great for what it is. I love playing D&D. My first contact with role playing games was AD&D First Edition,
right?
And it was only after and I think by that point I had read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, and then I found out there's actually one of these kinds of games, but more designed for Middle Earth. So the One Ring, I think looks to some of that, looks to sort of the building your character up out of, or the abilities of your character up out of a variety of skills, and you work on improving those over time. And then there's a combat system that is super lethal, or can be very lethal, much more lethal than in D&D. Yeah, and so the focus really is that you try and when you're trying to successfully roll for your skills, you try and amass some more D6s in there.
So gonna dive into that a little bit more. So because look, any system that takes the lonely D12, a die that used to be it feels like it's always been kind of a lonely die in D&D. Like the D12, such a great die, but doesn't get as much use or as much love as it needs to.
It does not.
So how does that? So all right. So when we say it's a skill based system, are there classes, or it's like, hey, it's a little bit more of a free form character creation set where you go, okay, here's your 15, or here's your pool of 30 skills. Pick which 10 you like. Here's the points you allocate to them. Or is it, nope, you're a hobbit. Here's your skill set that you can pick from. Like, so if we're walking through character creation, what is, how do you figure out which skills that you get in that situation?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. So it's a little bit more simplified, and so it's a bit more streamlined. It's very much like here are all the skills. You can always roll and try on any skill, even if you don't have any training, and you might succeed. But there are 6 professions, like they're called callings, I think what you're called to do in the world. I was just looking through those again, working with a player on developing their characters, and they don't actually have that much influence on your character. They do a little bit. They basically give you what in Dungeons and Dragons would be advantage on a few skill rolls, but most of the sort of initial skill development comes out of what the One Ring calls cultures. The word race is not a thing in the One Ring, which I dearly love, because we're getting away from that, and it's all based on culture. It's all based on what you're raised to be able to do, and so each culture then has some focus in some skills, neglects others maybe. And then you get a little bit of initial experience to try and buy a few extra skill ranks as you're leveling up. And it's level-less. It's really just here's more experience points to develop your skills further. That's when you can really decide, so what do I want to be good in?
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. That actually sounds somewhat similar to not. I take it back. So the Star, and I bring this up because I recently played a Star Wars one shot. It is the Fantasy Flight game Star Wars system where you pick your class, and then you have a very MMO-esque skill tree that you use kind of points to navigate your way through. But then you also can, you basically can spread out into other skill trees. It just kind of gives you a general starting point. It sounds a little bit like those callings are closer to a background in D&D, especially with the direction D&D is going with backgrounds in the new subset, than it is a true class per se.
Yeah, they give you a little bit of extra knowledge. Yeah, no, it's actually much more like a background in that you get some skills that you're favored in, a little bit of extra knowledge on something. But it doesn't have the one thing that I think callings have a strong influence on this, because it's Middle Earth and you're fighting the shadow. There are hope points which allow you to increase your dice pools,
Okay.
and shadow points that you can take on, which sort of start dragging you towards desperation or giving up, or and your calling, your profession determines what your particular shadow path is. Should you start to get overwhelmed?
Interesting. Yeah, that is I again, very very light side, dark side. So let me ask you this, because have gotten a little bit of exposure to Trials of the Apocalypse, and specifically, I mean the Adventure Zone just did a short little campaign called Dust. I don't know if you're an Adventure Zone guy or not. That was one of the Trials by Apocalypse games. There's 1,000 of them, but it was basically, it was kind of that similar. You had not a corruption stat, but let's call it corruption. And as you basically accrued points in that, and you actually unlocked additional abilities as you accrued those points, with the tipping point be, hey, if you ever went full corruption, then you now become an NPC under the GM's control. Go roll a new character. As you go down that shadow path in One Ring, are there abilities tied to that, or is it just more like a light side dark side force thing that it's really just potentially reflecting the corruption path your character can take?
It's much more dark side. You don't want to go that way. You don't get additional abilities. That would be an interesting thing to hack. That would be a really interesting thing to homebrew. I think the game system's trying to discourage going that way.
Well, and that was my kind of fault, because like Lord of the Rings is very heroic narrative oriented. Right. It is the One Ring kind of the similar situation where, like, hey, D&D, you can do a rogue centric campaign. If you want to be just complete mercenaries, you certainly can be. But I just can't envision a Lord of the Rings game where you're like, hey guys, we're gonna play horse thieves. Like, it just doesn't like, those Rohan guys, they got a lot of horses. Let's go ahead to Rohan. That's my one Lord of the Ring reference I can throw out there. But that's about all I got. That and Balrogs. So it is all generally heroic adventuring, right?
It is, and in fact, so shadow points, there's a number of ways you can start to accumulate those. Things like encountering just a terrible scene of carnage, or encountering certain kinds of adversaries that might give you shadow points. Might make you fear or despair. But you always get to try and roll to not take on as much, or not to take on any of the shadow points. The one exception is what's called misdeeds. This, when you decide to do something that's not within that sort of hero ethos that you mentioned, like stealing a horse. They can still do it, but the rule book explicitly says, as a lore master, you should really tell your players if they're about to commit a misdeed, and then they can decide. But in that case, they do not get to try and not take on those points. They get.
Oh, okay. So then that's just an automatic. Interesting.
Because you've made that decision, right?
Yeah. Interesting. I guess what is with the shadow, and that was one of the things that always really kind of baffled me. And keep in mind, my true first exposure to Lord of the Rings was the Rankin Bass Lord of the Rings animated specials at the Montessori school that I went to, that were both like wonderful and incredibly terrifying in certain ways to a kid. The back, like, just like and didn't truly understand what they were doing, and don't feel like they told a full story. But they did have the singing in it. That is one thing that is very that what surprised me when I went and actually read the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, the amount of music that's in it, the number of songs. Again, Tom Bombadil, the dwarves singing in the beginning of the Hobbit. Is that does that make its way into the game at all? Is there, or is that absent from the TTRPG?
Yeah, no. The designers of this game, even like for first edition, and then the reboot with second edition, Francesco Nepitello, and those guys did an amazing job at capturing through mechanics, like the feel,
Mm-hmm.
the aesthetic, the vibe of those books and of the Middle Earth it describes. So there is a skill called song,
Oh wow. Okay. Cool.
which can be, to sing a song well or recognize a song or whatever, but it's a social skill basically as well, where you might be able to transmit knowledge, or try and unravel, find out some more knowledge through a song. There is you can the group as a whole, they can start composing songs in their downtime, and then if they all sing it together during combat, for example, during battle, they can shake off weariness. So
Oh
there's
wow.
a lot of
Wow.
that in
Wow, that is really cool.
there. Hmm.
That is neat. That is again very, very reflective of the original source content, which is pretty cool. I gotta ask, only because
Yeah.
you brought attention to your bookshelf behind you. All right, we're going second shelf down, and my unfortunately my camera picture on the big screen is it, what are those? Are those Wheel of Time, or what book series am I looking at here behind you?
Yeah, there's a lot of Wheel of Time on that
Okay,
second
all
shelf,
right, all right.
as well as some Dragonlance.
Okay, okay.
I'm
I had to
second.
ask, like that one those one that set of covers is that weird, that one artist that did just a ton of cover
Mhm,
art across so many
mhm.
different series, that just the color palette of it is so distinct. I'm like, I am 80% sure those are those are Wheel of Time. I just have to be.
Yep, yep.
Have you played any of the Wheel of Time TTRPG at any point?
I have not.
Okay.
I grabbed all of those, and I've been looking at Goodwill stores and
Mhm.
grabbing all of those wonderful editions, because I love that cover art. I just need now. I lead the Mode Sit Junior series as well, and then all of my shelves will look like that. It'll be amazing.
Are you so are you a Lord of the Rings a Jordan fan at all, or have you like not Lord of the Rings, I'm sorry, Wheel of Time fan
Wheel
at
of
all,
Time.
or is it yeah.
I will admit I've only really read the first, and a long time ago I read the
Mm.
first volume, and sort of like, yeah, okay, this is a Lord of the Rings clone.
Mhm,
Hmm,
mhm.
I'll move on to other things.
Yeah.
Uh, and then I think maybe it's nostalgia, maybe it's age kicking in, sort of the role playing gamer's midlife crisis. Remember all those books you used to have?
Yeah,
Well, let's get
yeah.
them again. So there's
Um,
there's Goodwill or two around here, and I don't know. There must be some other fantasy fans around here, but they keep dropping their volumes there.
Oh yeah, no,
Um,
I did the circuit of Half-Life books for a long time, and then
mm,
had kids and went, oh, all of my stuff has to go away now, because I have to make room for other people's stuff. So, two quick questions.
yeah.
One of them probably serious, one of them probably less serious. Is Barrel Rider a calling? I feel like it should be.
Well,
Have you
highly
ever
specialized.
more actual real question? Have you ever had your players in barrels in one of the games that you've run?
Not yet, but who
Mm.
knows? I'm just starting new campaigns, so I might put that in there as an option. Battle Rider is not a calling, although Treasure Hunter is
Ah, there
is
you go.
calling, that the reluctant Bilbo kind of calling, or as Hope for TTRPG once played it. It's like, well, collecting personal treasures, things that are valuable to yourself. It doesn't always have to be money. It doesn't
Mm.
always have to be a thief. Somebody else was asking, is there a Star Wars book? No, there's no Star Wars book. I think I played a Star Wars TTRPG once, many eons ago, and never got the chance to do it again.
yeah, Neofet, who's actually in our Discord now and prepping for the Gimme the Belt system, is who I played a Star Wars one shot. And if you are reach out to him, Jay is an incredibly nice person. Was gracious enough. Is a previous guest quest guest, and that will be coming out. And we've recently transitioned to really try to focus guest quest on different systems and people who are kind of specialists in other systems. And so just going back to the mechanic side of it, because again, that lonely D12 is calling me back. So you've got the D12. How do the
Mhm.
D12 and then because you mentioned the D6s of the dice pool, how do those two
Yeah.
interact? So how does the D12 interact with the dice pool of the D6s?
Let's see. Can we see these?
Yeah, we can. There we go. There they went.
There the D12 goes. There you go. Those are the player version of the dice.
Oh, very cool. Very cool.
There's the lore master version. It's got
Oh, there you
Soronic
go.
dice.
Much more sinister looking.
My little goth heart is very happy about those. Um, so the goal is always to meet a certain number. It's called the target number. It's sort of like the DC
Mm-hmm.
in D&D, right? So this number, if you want to manage to do this skill, here's the number you've got to meet. Although in the One Ring, it's character based. It's not situation based. The
Oh,
players
interesting.
always know the number they have to meet, and all the skills are under three. There are three attributes: strength, heart, and wits, which is
Mm.
directly out of Lord of the Rings. In quote. And so you always know based on how strong your character is, how much heart, how much inner resources they have, and bravery and things like that, and how wits is sort of intelligence, but also emotional intelligence, social sort of.
Mm.
It's interesting. It's very broad, but you always know what you need to roll. You always roll the d12, no matter what your level of skill is in something, because it can yield results from 1 through 10, and then
Mm-hmm.
it is two special phases.
Ah,
Uh,
okay.
and one is the Eye of Sauron,
Oh dear God. Okay.
which ordinarily is just a 0 unless you've taken on too much shadow or other things, and then bad things might happen. And the other special phase is the G rune for Gandalf, which is an auto
Ah,
success. So even if you have absolutely no training in something, you can always succeed. 1 time in 12.
interesting.
Um,
Interesting.
and then for each skill level you have in something, skill rank you have in something, you get to roll an additional d6. And so out of all of those dice together, you try and meet your target number, which at the start can be a bit more difficult. But then you get to spend hope points, add
Mm.
a few additional dice depending on the situation you can spend to help others. And so you try and roll as many dice as possible.
So with a One Ring adventure, I guess what's kind of your go-to narrative? So with D&D, again, I think, oh man, the challenge of always having it be on the heroic side. Because I mean, look, one of
Mm,
the nice things about D&D is the flexibility of having your PCs be bastards. No offense, guys. Are they? Oh, wait, shoot, shit. Some of them are actually here in the chat. Earmuffs, guys. Uh, but they, but with is it something that you skew towards obviously not everybody can be traveling to Mount Doom with Frodo, right? So
right.
what would be like a typical especially with a shorter one shot or something like that, what would be the without giving too much away, because obviously I know, and we're going to talk about the pro DMing side of what you do in just a second,
Right, right.
without giving away giving the product away for free, so to speak. What's a typical kind of challenge arc that you would put in front of a players in this particular setting?
And I've got to be careful too, because at least one of my players
Uh-oh.
is in you. Hi, Alan.
Uh,
Um, so I can't give anything away from the new campaigns. But while the focus is on heroics, that's right, no spoilers. While the focus is on heroics or heroicism,
mhm.
sort of system wise, I don't think it has to be sort of high heroics and saving the day all the time, at least not in this grand. I mean, especially in the Lord of the Rings, but in the Hobbit too, I think a lot of these heroic deeds are actually very small in nature.
Hmm.
Often it comes down to being nice or helping somebody,
Yeah.
or and then so I start small. I love, oh my god, I love low level play in D&D too, and
Yeah.
in any system. Both as a player, I think it can be really fun, and as a GM, I love it because it makes, for me at least, I think it makes for often more interesting adventure design,
Hmm.
because you can throw all of this harsh stuff at, and you have to be very careful, right? And
Oh yeah, they're so
what's the challenge
fragile. Yeah,
be, right?
their
Yes,
little adventure soft spots haven't fully formed yet, so you have to be
squishy,
very
squishy
careful.
little guys. Um, and so I think as uh, I mentioned, combat is really dangerous, and that it never stops being dangerous. Um, in the One Ring, so you actually have to be careful about what you throw at them, and so I think it really pushes me to focus a lot more on some of the other pillars
Hmm.
of gameplay, um, some mystery, some puzzle, some uh, and the One Ring foregrounds social encounters
Hmm.
as well. In fact, it sort of has the sort of the standard gameplay, like, oh, you're doing stuff, you're rolling skill rolls, maybe skill challenges, but then there are three things that have a specific set or an extra set of rules. One is journeying, like
Hmm.
traveling is a big part of the One Ring and what happens while you're traveling.
Hmm.
Not surprising, right? Lord of the Rings, they're constantly on the road. Very little happens. Well, actually, but the stops have a
Hmm.
huge impact. But
Yeah.
there's punctuating the journeying. Um, Combat, of course, is one, and then what they call councils. So meetings with important groups or NPCs where you want to achieve something, you want to get them to do something for you. And so there are a lot of social skills actually in their song. Uh, Awe, persuasion, courtesy, riddle is a skill.
Oh, that is, I love that. I
Yeah.
love that riddle is in there as a skill. That's really cool, man. And I think the looking at your start playing profile, that's one of the things that I think you accentuate is that you focus on kind of the ROLE of the role playing, a piece of it.
Mhm.
Before we go over to talk that piece of it, I guess the one other question I had, and it's because Alan Hostings, either Alan has Tingsar, in which case I'm sorry, some penicillin will clear that right up, or I'm not even going to
Right.
try and guess how to say your name correctly.
Alan Hastings.
There you go. Alan has Tingstar. It's bad case of the Tingstar. I got the Tings, y'all. The question would be, he mentioned that the wound system is really interesting. What is what is he talking? What is the wound system in Lord of the Rings?
So that's where combat becomes dangerous. Each character has points, like hit points, endurance
Right.
points, called, which is sort of the concussion side or exhaustion
Mm,
side of combat, right? You can get dinged with weapons, and if you hit somebody or you get hit at base, each weapon does a certain amount of endurance damage, and so you can fall unconscious from that. But the really dangerous thing is each weapon or each attack has a certain chance of causing what's called a piercing blow. So a hit that goes past your ordinary defenses. And hopefully you're wearing armor
mm,
at that point because you have to try and make a roll to defend against that. Depending on the weapon, depending on the adversary you're facing and the attacks they have, that might be some things. With a dagger, it's going to be fairly easy as long as you have some armor.
right.
Something a long sword or a battle axe or something, they're vicious, difficult,
Mm,
and so you can take on wounds then, which are sort of like critical hits a little bit in Merb, although then you don't have additional tables, thank goodness. You have to roll on, um, and some adversaries that it will just one wound will take them out. Um, Whereas with others, stronger adversaries, and with the player heroes, player heroes can take two wounds, but then
mhm.
you are dying.
Oh wow. Wow, it is that straightforward. So
So
interesting. Yeah, that's that very much harkens back to first and second edition D&D in certain ways, because there was when you got hurt there, it was much you know, that is one of the things that I've seen people criticize 5e about, and I'm like, I get where you're coming from, but having played the other side of that, sometimes it's nice for you to just take a nap and come back from the brink of death. Whereas back in my day, but like in the first edition, second edition D&D, and we've covered this on previous DM explainings, like it would take you, if you didn't have a healing spell or a healing potion, it could take you like a month to heal all the way back up. And it's like, okay,
mhm,
let's role play physical therapy for a little bit. But
mhm,
I think alternate, and I think this is something that you see. Delta Green definitely has it, and I think some of the
mhm,
other more narratively focused games um, definitely create a broader have a more consequential combat system and a more consequential health system, because
mhm.
they are more socially focused. That but by the time it gets to combat, things are getting real for real.
Huh. You think that's a combo is because the socially focused, then maybe combat also needs to be more
Mm.
dangerous?
I think
Yeah.
I don't think that's I don't I am still in the early stages of doing the deep dive on a broad system. Again, I'm a nerd for the systemic aspect of this stuff, but there does seem to be a little bit of a correlation between the importance put upon the social aspect of a game and the severity or the impact of the combat system. And and even in some like dice pool games that I've kind of dipped my toe into a little bit, where it's like, hey, in order to give yourself that bonus dice, you can take on a harm, or you can take on what would be the equivalent of a wound, to give yourself an extra, like you are basically spending hit points to give yourself advantages on rolls. That those hit points become much more precious. Like the consequences of your actions have a lot more depth than they do necessarily in D&D. And I think that's interesting, and I think it creates some very interesting storytelling situations. But it also it's just a different type of game. You know what I mean? And not a worse game or a better game. Just it creates different interactions.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean it's certainly in the Wandering, it drives you a little bit away from combat towards other things, and at the same time, I think it makes combat then feel a lot more consequential as well, especially like I mean in our D20 in our level 20 game, hit points, although of
Mm-hmm.
course you can also cause insane amounts of
Yeah.
damage. It's a gradual whittling down of that resource, whereas in the One Ring, there are some ways to increase your endurance, so you can
Mm-hmm.
very incrementally, but there are some ways, and so you can maybe withstand a little bit more of the just getting jostled around and a few bruises. That wound mechanic, you'll never. I don't want to say never. There might be a few sort of special abilities that allow you to change something better, but by and large, you'll never be able to extend that and take on more than that second wound.
Yeah, that's it. I think it's interesting, and again, that's one of the one of the systems that are kind of on deck for me to really kind of do a deep dive into. And that is, I think, again, I think it's an interesting approach to this particular type of game. But then again, I play with the Pentagoons, so we would have made it maybe 2.5 episodes, and it'd be like, okay, guys, podcast over. They everybody's in convalescence now. So let's talk a little bit about what Start Playing Games is, and how
Mhm.
you got involved in it, and what that experience has been like for you. So for the uninitiated, what is Start Playing Games?
Startplaying.games is a website. It's basically a clearinghouse for where players can find GMs to run games for them, or join existing one shots and campaigns. And it's a great place for GMs to advertise games they want to run, And you can do it for free on the platform. Other than maybe I don't know why you. Well, no, I
Hmm.
mean it's still a good place. It's a good and it looks nice. It's well run, I think.
Hmm.
But you can also then run games for charge, and I came to it during early pandemic.
Oh wow, so so well, dear God, time is a flat circle. That's been 2 years, but fairly recently in the context of our lifespans.
Yeah, yeah, no, the pro jamming, that's new. And there had been a little break in my jamming and
Hmm.
playing in general. And so I thought, during the early days, I'm like, well, sitting at home, what do I
Hmm.
do? How do I meet friends? And so I just started a home game with friends via Zoom, and then I was like, well, let's look into what platforms are there out there, because I didn't want to do the start my own website and then try and find people
Hmm.
and start playing that games. I like it because it takes care of the payment side, and it's nice for me as well as the players, because then I think I would find that really uncomfortable doing it directly and individually via a payment website, and then ugh. Um,
Yeah, it's weird if you slide a tip jar around the table before you get started, and you're like, well, and then you take it like, okay, I guess everybody's rolling a DC 15 or higher tonight. You know what I mean? I can definitely see how that would be a
yeah.
challenge.
And then they advertise games and GMs. They do some good outreach, and yeah, I'm liking it as a nice platform to just to run the business side of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I've actually checked it out before. Again, kind of very early pandemic, but
Mhm.
instead launched a podcast. I won't judge whether or not which of us made the right decision. You
Neither.
definitely seem happier and definitely less gray in your beard than me. But no, it's so one of the things that because I'd always DM'd for good friends, and occasionally they would bring it like a friend would bring a new person to the table. Like there's very rarely that I was ever DMing for strangers in a vacuum,
Mhm.
until very recently. And I mean, look, I've been doing this for far well as long as my beard would indicate. Let's just put it that way. And just recently, I found myself DMing for flat out strangers for the first time. I run a Tuesday night group that is professionals in Austin, that kind of came into through a public appearance that I did, and it is been a very different experience for me, kind of
Mhm.
learning that. So can you speak what has that been like? What had you done a lot of DMing for new people in the past? Is this your first experience DMing for strangers, and what has that kind of on ramp been like for you?
No, not that much really. I think, I mean, here and there, but no, this was really, I think, the first time where it really was just sort of calling into the void and going, "Hey, anybody want to play a game that I'm running and pay for it?" The audacity, ridiculous. Um, I've been very lucky. I've found
Mhm.
amazing players, not just you, Alan, but of course, you as well. No, I've had wonderful people just come and play with me, and find these games. I think it helps. It helped from the start that I am uh, a teacher. I teach at a
Mhm.
community college now. I'm English faculty there, so I think it's helped from the start in being having a group of complete strangers and then going, all right, we're going to do something together for a while.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think it helps me to know how to run uh, run the sessions. Not that you have to have that training, but it's helped me, um, and sort of, yeah, manage the group, manage the dynamics, help help good social dynamics develop. I hope so far so good.
So you mentioned you had a session zero recently, and that may have been before we actually went on. So what are one of the things that's been, and I first got exposed to them when I did a charity appearance, but I am a huge fan of the lines and veils and the The name of it always escapes me, but the kind of the standardized survey now for the here's yellow, red, green. Here's what I'm cool with. Here's what I'm not cool with. Kind of check safety checklist for TTRPGs. I think that's incredibly valuable. I think it is something that ensures that when people come to a table, they know it's going to be a welcoming experience. They know that it's not something that is going to be potentially combative, and quite frankly, screw anybody who is who is casting shade on. Is that something that is kind of built into your session zero, or talk to me? What are some of the important components of your session zero?
No, absolutely. And honestly, shout out to Start Playing Games. They require you to list which safety tools you use. I mean, I don't know. I've never had the situation where I didn't choose any of them. I don't know whether they would greenlight a campaign because they still or a game they review that. But you have to fill in something for content warnings. They're really good about that. I would never start, certainly not a campaign, longer stretch of sessions and games without a session zero when I'm playing with people I don't know.
Yeah.
Uh, both because I don't know what each of them is bringing to the table, what each of the players needs, what each of the players would really not be okay with, and genuinely just what would make them feel not okay if that came up. It's one thing if you're playing with friends, right? Or if
Right.
some of your friends brings in a new person, but they've been pre-screened, or a little bit, so probably about what they. But even then, you'd have some kind of conversation, ideally.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, no, absolutely. Session zero is a total must, both for let's all meet, let's get to know each other, let's talk about the characters, build characters, but then also so here are the things that I'm never going to do in my games, or sort of veiled, that I also don't want to see from players, and then additional, what are things that you wouldn't be okay with.
Yeah, Dreeken is also has also got a background in education. Is a teacher, and he's like, that's a very nice way of saying you're used to wrangling dumbasses. So you got that is such teacher speak. But no. So I think that's very interesting. That that there is a correlation between the kind of skill set that you build on the educator side of things, and then as a dungeon master. I think there that does kind of prep you pretty well. I guess the question would be, what so there you kind of slid into it fairly easily. What's been the biggest surprise out of it, or what's been the biggest positive experience you've gotten out of it, as being a pro DM, or being DMing for strangers?
On the one hand, I get to GM all these campaigns now. I get to write up all these campaigns and actually run them with people, and I have a good justification for it, like why I'm taking up so much of my time with this stuff. No, it's another. I was saying to my partner the other day, like, wait, did I just manage to turn my hobby into a second job?
Mm-hmm.
This is stupid.
Hey, look, I get to write off my D&D books as an expense for the podcast. Don't think I don't revel in that fact. Every year as I'm getting screwed on my taxes, I'm like, to the guy I was like, but I can put Spelljammer on the. He's like, yes, you can put Spelljammer. They're like, all right, at least screw you, government. So there is a delight to that when you, because it is a trick, right? We are taught we are taught generally in this generation to say, hey, uh, recreational leisurely activities are a luxury, are kind of a dalliance, and don't have the same intrinsic value that work does. So when you can marry those two, for me at least, I'm like, ha ha ha, I'm cheating the universe somehow by monetizing my fun, or turning my fun into work.
Yeah, which is sad. That's a sad sentence.
No,
I'm
it's
really
incredibly unhealthy.
regretting
I know.
everything
Look,
now.
look, I'm from Gen. Yeah, no, look, I'm from Gen X. It's just the way that we
Ah,
are. Yeah.
all right.
But look, honestly and true, there is a joy to that, right? Like when there
Right.
is, when you are able to take something that is pure fun and is pure play, and add another layer of purpose to it, even if it is something as, as practical as, hey, you know what, I get reimbursed for my time
Mhm.
doing something really fun, is that's, look, it's okay to put chocolate sauce on the ice cream, man. It's okay to put a little extra happiness into it, which is, which is really cool. But you just have to take the positive spin, I think.
Well, the other thing that's been really fun is just to meet lots of new players, and
Hmm.
and it's been really just amazing, the people who've come through and who are. I'm so stoked for these new campaigns where you get some, and maybe it's this game system and that world that attracts a certain kind of players with certain kinds of interests. I've had the lore hounds who are super deep
Hmm.
into their Tolkien lore, and manage to insert that into their characters builds as well as of the role play in really interesting ways. I've had I think maybe again because of the game system, players who are just really into the social
Hmm.
journey aspects and so the role play of that. Um, it's just been a ton of fun.
So, the Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power Amazon TV show, fan, not fan. What as the official Lord of the Rings expert that is known by the Gimme the Loot podcast, you are our Lord of the Rings official correspondent. What is your thoughts, feedback on the Rings of Power show?
This is tea.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Because, like, here's the thing: as somebody who's not a LOT scholar, I was expecting absolute garbage, and I'm now, keep in mind, I'm 2.5 episodes in, and I'm like, this is surprisingly compelling.
Hmm.
Um, but I know it probably is just taking a big old hot steamer on top of some of the lore and some of the like the is it taking a ton of license? What is?
So I will say I think we have to talk about it, don't we?
Look. First of all, this is the Give Me the Loot podcast. Haters are more than welcome. If you've ever listened to 5 minutes of our content, our brand is hating on shit and each other. So by all means, don't feel bad if you're like, man, this is where it's terrible, and this is why. This is what we're here. We are here for it. We pull up a chair. Let me take a sip of my now empty glass of wine. All right, bring, come on, unload.
No,
I
no,
know.
I actually just today watched the last episode. So oh my god, I'm gonna try hard not to spoil anything. Um, I was excited when it came out that they were going to do this. I was still excited. I think when I watched the Wheel of Time that they put together. I mean, different group, obviously, different writers and everything.
Didn't care for it, but that's just me. So
Well,
yeah,
and yeah, I
yeah,
didn't have that kind of investment in that show,
mhm,
but there were elements where I thought, well, if this is an Amazon product, I
yeah,
think we could like the casting, right? The
yeah.
diverse
Oh,
casting is
the
such
loved what they did with the cast.
right.
Absolutely loved what they did with the cast. Loved the production value. Didn't not to get into the Wheel of Time too much, but the Wheel of Time was notoriously a Spielbergian take on epic fantasy in a lot of ways. There wasn't a lot of that explicit on-screen violence or anything like that. They it seems like they tried to Game of Thronesify Wheel of Time a little bit.
Mhm.
And I'm not somebody, I am somebody who, look, I don't care how far you deviate from the source content as long as it's good and it makes sense.
Mhm.
Some of the deviations they did, it's just like, guys, this is just like a narrative complication that doesn't make any sense to me, and
Yeah.
that I find offensive. But
Yeah.
anyway, not to make
Yeah.
it about, so Lord of
No,
the Rings.
this is exact. I think that's the pull quote for my view of the Rings of
Mhm.
Power as well. They did amazing on the casting. Love the casting, both in terms of like just how they diversified Middle Earth,
Mhm.
which, oh my God, after Peter Jackson's version of it was desperately necessary. And we can say this from the start, like,
Well,
fuck all the
and to be
angle.
fa- and to be fair, Tolkien's version of it too. Like,
Well, that's the fun thing. All this racist hate crying is just all of these people we need to defend. I'm defending the real Tolkien. Actually, you don't know your Tolkien as well as you
mhm.
think.
Yeah,
There are so many things, first of all, gaps that are not described
right.
in detail, where it's absolutely possible to have black dwarves and black elves and Hispanic hobbits and whatever. Um, Look, when you have and in lore, in canon, Tolkien has, I think, two maybe groups of elves he explicitly describes as very white, like very
Mhm.
pale and very blonde or white haired. Well, that by implication means that other groups of elves are not that, because otherwise
Yeah.
you wouldn't have to describe and say that group looks like this.
By implication, by somebody who is okay to the concept of diversity, yes. Which I
Well,
think,
that's
yeah, I think that I think I think the problem with the people that try to defend the less savory aspects of that particular take on Western fantasy
right.
are are just finding another way to code like, oh hey, look, I found a new code for my racism.
Right. No,
And
right.
so, you know what I mean, there's nothing there. I love the fact that they've diversified things. I love the fact that they have added some additional flavor and some dimension to it.
Yeah.
Real quick, not to be all fan servicey for our patrons here, yes, Karbe Nikki, what they did with Perrin's storyline is it just so wrong for so many reasons. And again, from a pure narrative construction, and look, for the same thing that they did to Matt's storyline as well. Like,
Mhm.
in both instances, it was like, let's add unnecessary drama for the core concept of the character to sensationalize what you had basically the scoundrel and the reluctant warrior piece of it, and they tried to heighten that by abusive drunk dad and loveless marriage that she dies in the first episode. I'm like, I was like, what is happening? Like, it was one of those things where, like, I don't even recognize this. And as a whole, it's not terrible, but it was one of those things where it was like, it is so off-putting, and this is probably the same experience I would have to think that you're going through on the Lord of the Rings. It's the
Yeah.
extra bits that they have inserted that it's like, man, say what with the who now?
Yeah. No, and I think with the Rings of Power, given what they had the license to
Yeah,
even play with, right? Because it's going to simplify a little bit now that Middle Earth Enterprises was bought up by somebody who also then owns the licensing
yeah,
might
yeah,
be a little simpler, but the material they had access to initially, at least, is very thin,
yeah.
and there's not a lot, and so that there was also then quite a bit of room for them. I think overall they've done a pretty good job given the constraints they had, having to squish the timeline because they
Mhm.
wanted to have viewer investment from the start in Elendil and Isildur, in human characters in general, because otherwise, like, I think the Second Age is what is it, like 6,000 years long. So basically, if you didn't squish the timeline, every new season all the human characters would be dead, and you're like, all right,
Yeah.
let's start again. um but I think overall they've been doing a good job, and thankfully in the final episode there were a number of narrative strands where like, oh, why are you doing this, this looks what
Mm,
it actually turns out pretty smart, a lot of it at
yeah.
the end.
Again,
um
I'm
yeah.
only 2.5 issues in, or 2.5 episodes in. My only issue with the series so far, as a Lord of the Rings neophyte, is the wait a minute. The big reveal is it's a sea and two mountain ranges like that. That, like, she's like, oh, it's not a glyph. It's somebody dropped a pin on Google Maps, and I didn't realize. I was like, oh, honey, please, come on. You
Yeah,
got, yeah, come on.
that's that's the
That
weird thing about it,
that
that
was
the some of the big stuff, which initially I was watching, and oh man, especially in episode 6, there were some things where like, what? But they
Mm,
actually managed to spin that out in the end, and some fun reveals in the last episode. They do that pretty well. It's these small things where like, oh, who wrote that? This is
mm.
terrible. Um, yeah.
So Dreeken, real quick, let's not bring the Last Jedi in front of this. The guest does not need to see me lose my shit on you guys. And unfortunately, not because I may or may not have alienated like a pillar of the TTRPG community when reaching out to him after he appeared on our show. And referencing the conversation we had about the Last Jedi and the prequels in his previous appearance on one of our shows, when asking him to do something for our charity event. But I have spent some extra time over the last couple of weeks in defense of the Last Jedi, and we can have that conversation in the goddamn Discord, not on the stream. But
Yeah.
so yeah, hey guys, we're getting at the 1 hour mark. It does, other than Dreeken trying to start fights with me when I'm a good like 10 ounces into a bottle of the red. Do you guys have any other questions for Kris on the Lord of the Rings side, on the professional GMing side? I mean, start playing. It's as easy as just going in and setting up a profile, right? Do they vet you at all? Is there like an application process? What does that look like?
Um, mm, I've forgotten everything already because I did it, in the
Mhm.
in the middle of. I don't think there's vetting in terms of when you first sign up. They look at your games. They look at your
Okay.
descriptions as well as, things like safety tools,
Mhm.
content warnings. They want a certain amount of description. Um, so yeah, I think they just look for the quality of what you're putting on there.
So here's the question, and again, not to impugn your potential professional integrity as a dungeon master, but
Mhm.
obviously player reviews 14.
Yeah.
So does the fact that this is, as you're driving the fantasy DM Uber to drop the guests off at Mount Doom,
Uh-huh.
do you ever flinch at throwing a hobbit in a volcano because they might leave a bad review? I mean, and again, obviously this is a side hustle, like, I mean, that's not to be glib with it, but that would be one thing that if I was pro DMing would at least be in the back of my mind.
Mhm.
And look, man, I'm the kind of DM that I want everybody at the table to have a good time, and I am going to feel guilty if somebody doesn't. But to add the fact that I may literally be judged at the end of it and publicly judged, um, may play into some kinks, but also would impact how spiky those spikes at the bottom of that pit are. Would that has that ever kind of tickled the back of the brain at all? Or
I don't think so. I mean, of course, I've also never gotten a bad review, but
oh, there it is.
so,
There's
um,
the victory then. Oh, we're gonna read some of them at the end. Don't you worry.
yeah,
Yeah,
cool,
yeah, yeah.
cool, cool. Um, the nice thing, and I think maybe this is the other thing that I like about start playing at games or being on a platform like that. On the one hand, there is a pretty robust complaint system. I think
Mhm.
if there was an issue, both for a GM with a player, problem player in the group, as well as a player having trouble with a GM, there are people you can appeal to. When you get a review, you get to see it first before it goes live. If there were things in there that you'd say, oh, that's not accurate, or that's just sort of revenge, sour grapes.
Mhm.
There is a way you can reach out to start playing that games before it goes live. I don't know how they investigate the stuff, then what they would do, but um, no, I don't. I'm totally gonna throw the Hobbit in a spiky pit.
Yeah, right on. Just because look, the games community is never known for being salty, so I wouldn't suspect any of them for ever having an issue. So, yeah, that was are all the play sessions on start playing one shot. That's a great question for Korobe Nikki. Um, Kris might as well have taken a long drag from a cigarette as he said that I've never left a player unsatisfied. True, Dreeken, true. The but yeah, and I think Alan actually answered this question, but for the future audience listening to the audio,
Yeah.
what is ratio of one shots versus long form campaigns, and what does a long form campaign feel like in Lord of the Rings, says somebody who is in year 2 of a podcast.
So I mean, I don't know for start playing dot games as a whole what the ratio between of one shots to campaign.
For you particularly, yeah, just
For
for you
me,
particularly, yeah.
yeah. I think yeah. Because the question was also so about start playing dot games. I mean, I think there's a whole big range, and there's short mini campaigns, there's long things, there's how to play, there's instructional stuff now where you can have workshopy stuff. For me, the past year, I mostly ran one shots to just sort of test the waters. I did a whole bunch of D&D. I did a whole bunch of Adventures in Middle Earth, which is the 5e port of the first edition of the One Ring. They just did pre-orders for the second edition port into 5e, which has got a yet another name because it's another publisher. What is it? Lord of the Rings role playing is what it's going to be called.
Okay.
PDF rule books. I'll probably run some of that at some point as well for all of you folks who love your 5e but want to play it in Middle Earth. This is the first time that I'm starting full-length campaigns, and we'll see how long they last. It's going to be, I think, we'll start it and we'll see how long it goes, and how long player interest persists. I'm excited.
So, yeah, no, that's cool, man, and I won't dive too far into that because it's hard to have those conversations without giving away spoilers to what you're planning or what you're doing. But well, cool, man. I absolutely appreciate you coming on and taking the time to sit down and talk with us a little bit. I think it's an interesting system. I think I think the pro play aspect of it is fun, and as far as the D&D play side of this, we're a delight to play with. We're a delight to have you on the fight night side of things as well. You guys did a great job, you and the M's, fighting a battle which would not end, despite despite the hellfire raining down from above and people turning into elementals, and it is all the booping and bopping and bipping. And to your credit, that particular brand of rogue has is and the combo that you brought to the table on it was one that was very, very well theory crafted and very well designed to just wallop the heck out of somebody with a massive sneak attack. So credit where credit's due, when going up against
rogues, man, insanity.
So, well, cool, gang. We're gonna wrap it up here, not just because my glass is empty, but I think we've taken enough of Kris's time. He's been an absolute pleasure to talk to. Thanks everybody for popping in. Kris, if availability for, are you booked up on Start Playing, or can if somebody liked what they heard, they could seek you out and sign up for a game? What's on the future for you?
No, as I said, I'm starting three campaigns. One is, I think, maybe 3 sessions. We're playing 4th session Sunday, but there's still a little bit of room in that one, and no problem to join that one still. And then the other 2 campaigns, so that one meets every week. The other 2 campaigns meet every other week, like every 2 weeks. We just had our session 0, so there's absolutely still time to jump into those, and there's still a fair amount of room. Friday night, Sunday morning, and Monday nights. So check me out if you want to play in Middle Earth and have time for a campaign.
Yeah, and guys, highly would highly recommended. You see a lot of stuff about, you would 20, like looking and not to be tacky to talk about price, but looking at his player profile and Start Playing games, $20 a session, man. That is cheaper than going to a movie in this day and age, and you're much less likely to get COVID doing it. And I guarantee you a much more satisfying experience than a lot of the movies are out there right now. You could also, and we didn't even get a chance to get into this, find of meat and marvel of mushrooms, meat and marvelous on Drive Through RPG, which is
And itch.
and itch.io, which is a adventure that you wrote for Underhill by Water. Is that
Mhm.
what is that OSR is pretty metal and metal rules, but it's far away from the source material of Tolkien, anachronistic. The game is about changing your aunt's escaped ornery goat, growing the biggest terminate. That man, I wish I'd clicked on this earlier because I am drawn to this. Why were we talking about Lord of the Rings? But we'll link all that in the Discord. If you're listening in the far flung future, check out the show notes below because you'll see links to his Drive Through RPG stuff. You'll see links to his Start Playing Games and whatever campaigns he may be running at that time, and probably his Twitter. Kris, again, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody, thanks for showing up. Hope you all enjoyed the stream. Make it in now. Hit buttons till it stops.